Coming up, which of the Nets free agents will be back with the team next season? I'll answer that after this.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. This show is 100% free on all those great platforms. And today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And on today's show, I'm going to be breaking down the Nets list of free agents, giving my opinion on what they showed last season, and offering predictions on whether they'll be back. And when I say free agents, I'm going to include the guys who are obviously the restricted and unrestricted free agents, which is Cam Thomas, Day'Ron Sharpe, Zaire Williams on the restricted end. Then you have Trendon Watford as an unrestricted free agent. And then you have the non-guaranteed guys who have contracts, but they can be cut. So the Nets have a decision on them, and that's Jalen Wilson, Keon Johnson, Tyrese Martin, Drew Timme, and Maxwell Lewis. So I'm going to start with the big names in this opening segment, and I'm going to focus on the two guys who I think will bring back the most noteworthy contracts. The first being Cam Thomas, a player I did an episode on last week talking about why the Nets are in a great position to retain him as a restricted free agent, and that is because they are the only team in the NBA with cap space. So other teams who are looking to give Cam an offer are going to be limited to the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which is around $14 million. I would expect Cam's deal with the Nets to come over that. Definitely people I've spoken with have said they expected to be in the range of $20 to $25 million annually. Bobby Marks recently put out an article, ESPN front office insider, former Nets executive, saying that he felt the same way about, the contract being in the 20 to 25 million range annually. And it's really going to come down to the length for Cam Thomas, a longer type of deal. Are the Nets comfortable locking him in at that number? Does he want to lock himself in at that number? Or is it a shorter term deal where the Nets maybe feel more comfortable not tying up long-term money on their books? He might also feel more comfortable doing a short-term deal because it allows him to re-enter free agency at a sooner date and potentially get an even bigger contract. But that's really what it's going to come down to for me, is the length of the deal. I expect it to be a multi-year deal. Whether it's a 2, 3, 4-year deal, the number, will be noteworthy, but I would expect it to come in at that 20 to 25 million range. And I think once the deal gets done, it's going to offer a great opportunity for Cam to, prove himself on this next iteration of the team. I spoke on my last podcast and I cast doubts about what his role will be in the NBA long term. And I want to clarify, I think some people hear that and think that I'm just extremely down on Cam. I think Cam can be a great player on a championship team. I think he can be a very productive player. I question whether or not he's going to be a starting player in the backcourt. And for me, that really comes down to the fact that, undersized guards who aren't great defenders and aren't great passers they're few and far between in the league. And if you're going to be that type of archetype of player, you really need to be an elite, efficient scorer. Can Cam get there? There's a possibility. Can he round out those other less polished aspects of his game? Certainly. I think he started to do it last season. So we'll see. But I think with a player of his archetype, there's always going to be those questions of, can this be a guy who, is a featured player in a championship caliber rotation? When I say featured player, I mean starter. So we'll see with Cam. I think that he has the arrows pointing up on him. I think that he's shown a lot of really promising things these last couple of seasons, and we'll see what he's able to do with this next contract, because I think it will serve as another audition period, because the Nets are transitioning into a new era. They're going to have a lot of younger guys coming in. They have a number of timelines and directions that they can go in, and whether or not he's going to be a part of that will ultimately come down to his development over this next season or two. So it's really exciting from that perspective, and I would expect Cam to be back on a multi-year contract. We'll see about the ultimate length. Next guy being Day'Ron Sharpe, I think a player that Nets fans have really grown to love, and I think showed a lot of really encouraging things last season. He's another guy that I'm expecting to be back. All these guys I'm talking about in this first segment are guys I'm expecting to be back. And Day'Ron, I think there were some questions after, his first 3 seasons. His third season, he cracked the rotation. as Cam Thomas did. And, he showed some flashes. I think he showed some flashes throughout all three of those first three seasons. But last season, he really came into his own. And while he battled injuries for a portion of the year, I think he showed enough to secure what will be a significant payday for him. It's tough to say exactly what it will be right now, but if it was something in the $10 to $15 million range annually for a 2 or a 3 year deal, something along those lines, I'm not sure exactly. I'm not saying any of this with inside info. I would just expect it to be something coming in around there. And there are other teams who could offer him that. As I said, teams who have access to that non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which is $14 million. But based on Day'Ron's comments, based on things I've heard from the Nets end and also from Day'Ron's end, I think that he's going to be back with the Nets. I think he likes it in Brooklyn, and I think he really enjoys, the role that he was able to play last year and the things that he was able to do. Because if we're talking about Day'Ron's production, he really impacted the game in a lot of different ways during his minutes last season. The rebounding is obvious. That's been the elite skill that Day'Ron's brought to the table since he came to the league. Last year, he was near an 18% offensive rebounding percentage. That was the second highest in the NBA among all players to play over 600 minutes. The only player who was higher than that was Steven Adams. So he is an elite rebounding force, especially on the offensive glass. And we're seeing it more and more in these playoffs that the NBA basketball, it's a possession game now. You need to win the possession games, whether that's, offensive rebounds, whether that's turnovers, whatever you want to say. If you can get more possessions than the other teams, that's becoming more valuable than ever before with the 3-point line, with the way the game's played, with the pace of it. So Day'Ron's offensive rebounding is a skill he's always had. He's maintained it, whenever he's gotten to play at any level. And I think it's really valuable. But the other things that you were looking at with Day'Ron's game, the passing started to improve last season. I think he showed that again this season. More importantly, the defense was a question, I think, throughout Day'Ron's minutes that he got through his first 3 seasons. He's this guy who was a little bulkier, struggled to move a little bit. And because of that, when the Nets were in their switching scheme, he couldn't do that. When he came in for Nick Claxton, they couldn't go to the switching scheme as they did with Claxton. So they went more to the drop coverage. He couldn't really play in the drop coverage. He wasn't big enough. He wasn't quick enough or long enough to kind of play that effectively in between the ball handler and the roll man. So we kind of got caught in no man's land a lot. But last season, he looked a lot better in that regard, in a lot of different ways, whether he got caught on switches, which I don't think the Nets were intentionally switching him often, but when they did, I thought he was really effective. And they really, towards the second half of the year, went to this kind of hedge and recover defense. And I thought that Day'Ron looked extremely well moving laterally, moving, in all directions defensively. And I think that was a really encouraging sign for his development, because when you look at the defensive numbers for Day'Ron, he posted a negative 6.7 defensive net rating last year. So that means that opponents scored 6.7 points fewer per 100 possessions when Day'Ron was on the court. That was the 6th best mark among all centers to play over 600 minutes. So he was really effective defensively. And this wasn't a small sample size. Like, he got to play a decent amount of minutes last year. So I thought that was really encouraging. Offensively, I think the finishing needs some work, but he did show some good touch signs. He shot 76% from the free throw line. He began expanding his range beyond 3. Obviously, the efficiency wasn't there, but he at least showed capable and willing of doing it. So could there be something to work with there? I think that, all of that is really exciting. And I think that Day'Ron's going to be a guy who's going to be back with the Nets. I think they're excited to see what he can grow into. And I think he's a guy who's done enough to show that he should have a solidified rotation role in the NBA for a while now. So, exciting developments for Day'Ron, and I'm excited to see him get paid this summer. Last couple of guys I want to talk about is guys who I think are very likely to be back. The first being Zaire Williams. He is a restricted free agent, but I should have mentioned this with Day'Ron as well. With Day'Ron and Zaire, the Nets can renounce their rights and make them unrestricted, which will save them some money towards their cap space, because their cap holds get taken away if you renounce their rights and they become unrestricted free agents. They can also negotiate extensions with all of these guys the day after the finals end. So whenever the day after the finals end is until free agency begins on June 30th, they have an exclusive negotiating window to negotiate extensions with these guys, so they could get it done before they hit the market. But Zaire is a guy who I expect to be back. Do I expect him to get a a big deal? No, I think it'll be another prove it deal, but I think he did enough coming over from Memphis as a former lottery pick last season, playing a rotation role with the Nets, really having a consistent role and more of a leash to do, certain things and make some mistakes. I think more so than he did in Memphis for a team that was trying to contend around John Morant and Triple J and those other guys. But I thought Zaire showed flashes. He had his best three-point shooting season of his career by far. He shot 34% on around 5 attempts per game. He's talked throughout the year about his tweak in his form from his trainers last year, and something that started in Memphis with some of their assistant coaches last season. He also talked about the willingness or the leeway that the Nets coaching staff gave him to shoot, and the kind of urging of them to tell everybody to shoot all the time. He said at points to me throughout the season that it was almost too much with how much they were telling him to shoot, but I think he enjoyed that. I think he enjoyed the role, and this is a really good opportunity for Zaire to be with a team who's rebuilding. He's definitely going to get minutes with, and will, potentially be able to do something and earn a contract down the line if he continues to produce. So I think he'll be back. I think Jalen Wilson, last guy I want to touch on in this first segment, another guy who I think will be back. He's a partially guaranteed contract next season, but I think, based on the flashes that he showed in his first couple of years, I think the Nets will give him another shot next season to see what he can be. And he's a player who, I think the jury's very much still out on whether he can be a rotation player in the NBA, but as a depth piece, as a guy who brings some intangibles, I think there's some exciting stuff there. And I do think that he's done enough to earn another opportunity with the Nets. So I think he'll be back as well. Coming up next, I'm going to touch on several players with uncertain futures who may have done enough to secure another season with Brooklyn. But before that, want to tell you about our friends over at GameTime. There's nothing like the NBA playoffs, the intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds. It's the kind of atmosphere you must experience live. And this year's matchups are already delivering. If you want in, GameTime makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff games. Prices on the app actually drop closer to tip-off, and with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, GameTime is a total game changer. Look, guys, I had a bunch of friends looking for tickets in New York for these Knicks playoff series. They seemed impossible to get. They went to the GameTime app, and Zone Deals were offering 60% off in great sections. They loved that they could see the exact view before buying, no surprises. The app makes it ridiculously simple. 2 apps, and you're done. And with the GameTime guarantee, you're getting the best deal. If you find a better price in the same row and section, they'll credit you 100%, 110% of the difference. The NFL schedule also just dropped, and you better believe I'm already looking at my fall calendar and picking which games to hit. GameTime makes scoring NFL tickets just as easy. You'll find great seats for as low as $100 thanks to exclusive discounts. If you've never used GameTime to grab NFL seats, now's the time. It's seriously a game day upgrade. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the GameTime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Coming out of the break, talking about the Nets free agents this coming season and who I think may have a chance to be back with the team, but I'm not sure solidified a spot on the roster next season. 3 guys I want to touch on. The first being Trendon Watford, a really encouraging and interesting player over these last couple seasons with the Nets. Played his first couple years with the Portland Trail Blazers, was more of a small ball 5, a front court piece, and then he comes in with the Nets and he plays more of a ball handling role, more of a change of pace, point forward type of player, a guy who's really versatile and I think brings a lot of interesting things to the game. I really liked what I saw from Trendon last season, of his ability to be a shot creator, of his ability to be a guy who generates offense late in the shot clock, some of the other things he was doing. I think defensively, it's not always amazing, but I think there's enough size and versatility there to hold up. So he has an intriguing skill set. The drawbacks with Trendon are obviously going to be, he's not really a center. He's not a true big man. And the 3-point volume as a ball handler still isn't there. The efficiency went down this year and the volume only went up slightly. I think he was at around 3.5 3-point attempts per 36 minutes. So that's not a lot of volume, and he was low efficiency on that volume. So That's really seemed like it's going to be a swing skill for him in the NBA, because if he's going to be a ball handler and a guy who you put the ball in the hands of, whether it's in the pick and roll, these other sets, you're going to want him to be able to pull up from three and make defenses pay in that regard. And if he's not, and you're going to play him off the ball, he's not big enough and doesn't offer some of like the center qualities that you want as a rim protector, as a lob threat, as some of those things, where if you don't offer those things, you want a guy to be a floor spacer, be able to do some of those things. And he really isn't a floor spacer. He hasn't shown a ton of willingness, and the efficiency this season went down. So it's tough from that regard. As a ball handler, I think he needs to clean it up. Handling, I think he was a little sloppy at some points, especially down the stretch of the season. A lot of turnovers, but he was being tasked with playing a role where he was, still adjusting to and changing to, where, his first couple seasons in the NBA, he wasn't a ball handler really in any capacity. So given the fact that it was a role change, I think it was really promising. I think that he does have a lot of utility. And even if he's a guy whose limitations as a floor spacer, kind of, the quirkiness of his position might keep him out of a rotation, like a high-end rotation, I think he's still a guy as a depth piece who is really interesting, because we've seen it throughout NBA seasons. Guys get hurt. You need guys who can handle the ball. You need guys who can generate offense. And a guy in Trendon who does have some positional versatility and can be that end of the bench guy who, when you need to dust him off after a few weeks, maybe he's on the bench, you bring him in. He can be a change of pace player. He can generate some offense. He can score, some late shot clock buckets. I think there's always a value for that in the NBA, and I think that will keep him on an NBA roster. Is it with the Nets next season? I would expect that Trendon is back and gets another opportunity. Do I think it's a foregone conclusion? I don't, but I think that it's an opportunity that, I think they'll give him another shot. And from his perspective, I think it's another year where, if you're in his position, you're going to want to be on a team where you'll get some minutes. And I think the Nets, obviously, as a rebuilding squad, could offer him that opportunity. So I think he'll be back. Not certain, but I think there's enough intrigue with Trendon and what he's brought to the table as a guy who's still young. He's only 24 years old, so we'll see what he can do there. Next player is Keon Johnson, a player the Nets converted from a two-way contract to a standard deal ahead of last season. And a guy who really played, a feature role in extremely heavy minutes, started a bunch of games for the Nets. He's at 10 field goal attempts per game. Of the players who finished the season on the team, Keon Johnson was third on the team in field goal attempts per game. The only guys ahead of him were Cam Johnson and D'Angelo Russell. So that really gives you a sense of, Keon. And I think the Nets are really had a lot of intrigue and were really interested by his tools, whether it be defensively, the athleticism. He's one of the most athletic guys to come in through the NBA Combine. He holds the NBA all-time record for max vertical leap at the Combine. So him coming in, having those tools, I think they were interested to see if he could round out some of the less polished aspects of his game, his offensive game particularly, and they gave him an extended leash to do so. And I think he showed some encouraging signs. I mean, the defense, first of all, coming into the season, I talked at Summer League last year to Steve Hetzel, who is one of the Nets' top assistants and coached Keon over in Portland. And the thing that he had harped on throughout the season was that he wanted Keon to reach his potential defensively. They were really, driving that home with him. You have these athletic tools, you have these gifts, you need to be a plus defender. And that's something that really is a non-negotiable for you, especially given the offensive limitations as a floor spacer and some things along those lines. And I think he was successful in that regard. The point of attack defense, the pressure, some of what we saw, Zaire Williams, I should have mentioned the defense as well. Zaire Williams, Keon Johnson, when we saw the Nets overachieving in some of these games and winning some games, I think frustrated Nets fans from the aspect of the tank last season. It was some guys like Keon Johnson, like Zaire Williams earlier in the year, Dennis Schroeder, but these guys who were pressuring full court were really buying into Jordi Fernandez's defensive philosophy and were just hustling and outworking teams. And I think Keon Johnson was one of those guys, especially on the defensive end. I mean, the three-point shot obviously wasn't there. The volume was there. He took around 5 per game, but shot only 31.4%. So that's something that could hold him back for sure. And if he's ever going to get to be a rotation caliber player in the NBA, in a good rotation, he's going to need to shoot the ball much higher and at a much better level, something that he hasn't yet to do up to this point in his career. But I think the Nets really appreciate what he did defensively last year. I think, the offense, there were some flashes, some self-creation and things along those lines. So I think he did enough to be back. And I think that the Nets are going to really try to lean into the development of that shot, and they'll see what they can get from him, because I think they appreciate the hustle, the athleticism, the spark, some of the things he brought, especially as a point of attack defender. So we'll see with him. Next guy, Tyrese Martin, a player who was on a two-way contract with the Nets. They converted him to a standard deal ahead of this season. Keon and Tyrese are both non-guaranteed contracts, so the Nets can cut them for basically nothing. But Tyrese was a pleasant surprise for the Nets and, really showed as an older guy. He's, going to be 26 years old next season, but he shot 35% from 3 on 5 attempts per game. He had that game earlier in the season against Phoenix where he hit 8 threes, had 30 points or whatever it was. So the shooting seemed like it improved, and he flashed some self-creation and pick and roll ball handling down the stretch of the year when the Nets really decimated, somewhat intentionally in terms of their ball handlers. He showed some flashes and he looked comfortable in that regard. He's an older prospect, to be coming off a two-way and just getting like his first standard contracts in the league. Is he a guy that's ever going to crack a rotation? I'm not sure, but I know that the Nets were high on what he did. I know that the Nets appreciate the way that he approached a lot of the things that he did last season. And the three-point shot had moments where it really looked legit. And there were some other decision-making chops, some ball handling chops, some things that he flashed that I think are going to be enough to bring him back to the Nets this coming season, at least for part of the year. So we'll see. But Tyrese Martin, another guy who I think did enough to secure a spot. Coming up next to close out the show, I'll touch on the Nets' final remaining free agents and how the team's horde of draft picks could affect their futures. But before that, want to tell you about our friends over at Wayfair. There's nothing like stepping into your own outdoor space and feeling like you've escaped to a personal oasis. If you're wanting to update your patio this season, Wayfair has made it so easy to turn it into a space that feels like yours. Comfortable, stylish, and ready for summer. Wayfair has everything you need to level up your outdoor space. Conversation sets, outdoor bars, fire pits, hot tubs, gazebos, and yes, even the perfect string lights to set the vibe. It's like giving your backyard that resort feel without the resort price tag. Guys, are you looking to redesign your patio this summer? Maybe your style leans more towards clean and modern. You'll love being able to filter and find exactly what fits your space and budget. The delivery is free, fast, and totally hassle-free, even with larger items. Don't wait. Make your outdoor space your dream oasis today with Wayfair and enjoy it all summer long. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop a huge outdoor selection. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair. Every style, every home. Closing out today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about some of the Nets free agents and whether they'll be back next season. Final two guys that I've yet to touch on, Maxwell Lewis and Drew Timme, two players who are on non-guaranteed contracts this coming season. Starting with Lewis, came over to the Nets in the D'Angelo Russell trade with the Los Angeles Lakers midway through the year. And I think you all remember, got in his first game against the Raptors, made a three. I think the final 2 minutes of the game he came in, and on that three fractured his tibia. And it seemed like it could be a really serious injury and that he was going to be out for at least the rest of the season and maybe even beyond that. And he comes back in 6 weeks and was able to return. And he showed some flashes. I mean, he got to play limited minutes, but when he was in the game, he had a couple of games that were really high level, one against the Boston Celtics. He, as a wing, a guy 6'7", has some length, has a little bit of versatility. He was not afraid to let it fly offensively. That was something that he took a lot of pride in, and he was effective on limited volume, but he shot 38% from three. I think it was 19 of 50 on the year he was. Played in 21 games. So the three-point shooting showed some promise. I think there's some length, some measurables, some things that are interesting. And he's a guy who, these two guys, Timme and Lewis, I'm not sure that they're going to be back. And I think that the Nets, influx of youth that is coming could influence their fates, because we all know the Nets have 4 first-round picks in this draft. They have 5 within the top 36. Are they going to bring in all of those guys and make 5 selections? I think that that's highly unlikely. I think it's, more likely that we're looking at probably 2 or 3 rookies coming in, and they could look to deal some of those picks, whether consolidating to move up or whether dealing for, future picks. So I don't think it's going to be all that. But even then, with all the guys that I've named before this, the partially guaranteed guys and the free agents, where we're talking about Watford, Tyrese Martin, Keon Johnson, Jalen Wilson, like all those guys who are going to be back alongside the obvious guys, like it's really starting to limit the roster spots, especially when you look at the guys who are already under contract. So there's only going to be, like 1-2 roster spots left with all the guys that I've already said are potentially coming back. And the Nets are probably going to want to leave a roster spot open for a salary dump. Another guy might come in, or multiple guys during this offseason that aren't on the roster right now. So that would take away salaries. That would take away roster spots. But, Lewis and Timmy are interesting in that regard because they're guys who can be converted to two-way contracts. They haven't used up their years of service in that regard, so they could be waived and then signed to two-ways and remain with the team. And I think that that's a route that could make sense for Lewis. He's a younger guy, came in out of Pepperdine, and I think that he has a shot to be a productive player in the league, or at least an end-of-the-bench guy in the league. So we'll see with him. But I think the three-point shooting and some of what he showed was encouraging. But, we'll see with him. With Timmy, I think everybody loved Timmy, was a fan favorite toward the end of the year, was just hooping in the G League with Long Island, multiple 50-point games, was averaging like 35 for a few weeks, and came in and got his first standard contract with the Nets. And I think it was really cool to watch him play. A guy who was somewhat of a household name at Gonzaga and an NCAA tournament performer. I think, he did some encouraging things, but I think the archetype of player, it's clear to see, why this was his first time, why he went undrafted, why he struggled to find an NBA home up to this point. Just him as a grounded center. When you're a guy who's, you're not a lob threat, he's tried to start shooting the three, shot it well with Long Island, but with the Nets was, low 20s in percentage from three. And when you're guys who's not a lob threat or not a floor spacer offensively, also defensively, not going to protect the rim. These centers, these grounded guys who, are often of a certain skin tone, a lot of them need to be able to shoot the three to stick in the league. You need to be able to do some of those things. You need to be a really good passer. There's some other things you need to bring to the table if you're not going to be that traditional, rim rolling or floor spacing type of guy. So Timmy, I think, there's intrigue. He can score in the post a little bit. There's things that he can do from that end. I think he showed some improvements as a decision maker as his minutes with the Nets went on, but there's just so much that, you can only do so much when you're that type of archetype and that type of skill set. So he's an interesting guy. He's a guy who could be converted to a two-way contract, as I said. And I think that that's a route that could, make some sense for him. I think securing a roster spot, a standard roster spot with the Nets this season, with the number of rookies they have coming in, with the number of free agents who are going to be coming back, I think that's going to be a real uphill battle for Timmy and probably Lewis too. So those are two guys who I'd look at as potential conversions to two-way contracts and who could stick with the Nets that way. But we'll see. What's the fate for Timmy, Lewis, all the other guys I named, which guys I'm right about, which guys I'm wrong about. I think there's a lot of intriguing players who could be back, into this next phase of the rebuild, and we'll see how it all shakes out. But that does it for this episode of Locked On Nets. Thank you to all of you for tuning in and supporting the show. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe if you want to help build this channel. Go to YouTube, Locked On Nets. Also, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify, anything you can do to engage is much appreciated. But I'll be back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.